Is this your first interview?
This is not my first interview ever. I've done a few here and there, probably not as many as you have with your experience in radio that you've been telling me about.
How do you find the perfect balance between waffling enough to keep the time filled, but not waffling too much that people get bored?
I think it depends on the environment, definitely. I think if you're in a live environment, it's very important that you definitely have some questions planned out that you could fall back to. And maybe also with some bullet points that can create a bit of a flow. I think that you don't want things to become fully rigid, and it's good to have a slightly natural, chatty conversation. And I think that no matter who you're talking to, it's probably a good idea to treat them sort of like a mate. I think if you're interviewing like even someone like Taylor Swift, I think that the best interviews to Taylor Swift would probably be more chatty and laid back than like just treating her as a god and overall legend. I think that can become quite a repetitive format sometimes. So I'd say, notes in a live environment are very useful. You want to know what you're going to talk about, how much you're going to talk about it, and so on, and how long for. I think it differs in a pre-recorded environment. Say you were making like a video, you could cut bits out. I think that's definitely helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When it comes to interviews, do you prefer being the person being interviewed or being the person that's interviewing somebody?
It probably depend on the situation and the amount of prep. I think in the right environment, being interviewed is probably a bit less stressful, especially in a broadcast environment when you're watching your timings up to the news precisely on the back of hour, and you have adverts to fit in, and you have all these other things going on. That's a lot to be thinking about, and it's probably quite nice to be sat back and having someone else in control to an extent. I suppose it depends how much you enjoy doing different things. And I think that being an interviewer can be interesting if you're interested in the topic. With the right opportunity, it's a great time to figure out certain things about a situation and find out stuff for yourself, and it gives you the power to ask questions on behalf of other people. So it's quite an important role, I think.
Yeah. If you could interview anybody in the world, who would it be?
If I could interview anyone in the world, I think the obvious thing to do here would be to go for like a massive pop star, such as Taylor Swift or like Harry Styles or someone.
You love Taylor Swift, don't you?
I'm just going back to what I've said earlier. I'm not a huge Taylor Swift fan, but I think that I don't know if I could interview anyone.
Anybody whatsoever?
I think it would depend on the situation, and it would depend on what area I was working in. If I was on a news broadcast and it was a big day in politics, getting, say, Liz Truss on 3 weeks ago would have probably made quite an interesting conversation. Nowadays, probably not so much. So in that sort of environment where you're responding to news, I think the answer for the best broadcast for that day would change depending on the situation. But if I had to pick one person overall just for like a chatty podcast, I think that if we're to stay on the topic of broadcasting, Scott Mills has to be an interesting one. He's one of the best people to ever do broadcasting, and I think it would be an interesting chat with him.
Yeah. And the same question, but the other way around. If you could be interviewed by anybody in the world, who would it be?
People always aim for like big chat shows, like it's like Jimmy Fallon in America, and I think that could be interesting in a way, but I don't know whether that necessarily appeals to me fully. I think that I don't know is the simple answer, and
or would it be like somebody that was on radio, like on Capital? Would you want to be interviewed by like Roman Kemp, or would it be a news presenter? I can't think of any names.
I don't think I'd do news or current affairs very well. I can't see myself on BBC Breakfast. But I feel like a breakfast radio show is always a fun one. You know, your Capital, your Radio 1, the current, slightly more trendy stations often have a bit of fun with their guests. You can often bring them in for a feature that's a bit of fun, bit of silliness, just something a bit light-hearted. I think that always makes a good listen. And again, it goes away from that generic format of taking a pop star and just asking them like about their album and their life, and maybe shows a different side to them that other people maybe wouldn't.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
That was a good chat.
That was an excellent chat. 5 minutes late back to lesson.